Hey everybody, it's Betsy from Story Drawing Skills. If this is your first time here, I'm making a webcomic in 6 months, 100 panels, hoping to do so, but I had a setback. So I had ended off with story beats where I just kind of described what's going to happen in each panel, and I wrote them up in a processor so it would count it for me, and I just separated out the sentences if I thought it would take, like 2 panels, or, sometimes I just wrote down the word beat if I knew I wanted an extra panel in there. So I did that with the entire set of sticky notes that I had, or I'd written out, things in my idea book, and I just wanted to see, the initial panel count, and it's easier to do that in a word processor. And it came up to 120 panels, which is actually bigger than my goal, but that's, the amount of panels I need for this story, maybe even more. It might expand as I go. But that's okay, I just want to get 100 done before the end of the year. So I went ahead and I thumbnailed out what I thought would happen on each page, but this is not working. And I'm going to talk about why it's not working and what I'm doing about it, because I learned a very important lesson from the setback of doing all this work to thumbnail and it not working, and that is you need to know your characters. Because the setback that happened was the result of me developing my characters' personalities and the story at the same time, but not really paying attention to if my characters could actually make the events in the story happen. So, big example right here. Early on in the story, I said that I really wanted this explosion kind of action scene for the title page. Really want that in there. And the way I was going to have that happen is that Clarice, who can use fire magic, was going to explode some combustible gas, and there'd be a great big boom, and I'd have my title page, and they'd be flying through the air, and it would be just a real great action-y kind of opening to my comic. However, her being the one to take action on her own and light that thing on fire goes against her personality, which I decided was going to be very lazy and very chic and high-end and not very voluntary or anything. It goes against her personality to take action on her own like that. So that was a problem. And throughout the story, it's her butting heads with kind of the leader character, the purple one, the Socorro is her name. So I had these two arguing, do you follow protocol? Do you do what's right in the moment? It's kind of that argument. But her personality doesn't support that. So then I'm like, uh-oh, we have a problem. So I didn't know whether to change my story to fit my characters. Do I change my characters to fit my story? A really big change that happened for the Beast Magic character, Kess. Originally, when I very first thought of her, I thought she was going to be very quiet and very observant and not too vocal about her opinions. Somewhere along the way, that changed pretty much when I gave her her tagline of Prickly Pipsqueak. Everything about her personality changed. So everything I had written for her in my story again, is not what her personality would be inclined to do. When these two are having an argument, she would not be inclined not to give her opinion because her personality is all about giving her opinion. And it was difficult to try to figure out how to make these characters that I've defined fit into this story that I've defined. And I've become a believer now that it's far easier to develop your characters first and then give them a situation, because you can use their personalities to dictate the story. Any character that you've seen in action and you know their personality and you know their tendencies, it's going to be easier to predict what they're going to do. So why don't I use that for my own characters? That's, a really great question right there, isn't it? So, yeah, that was a problem. But instead of dealing with it right away, I decided, you know what, I'm just going to draw the first panel anyway, because the first panel is going to be the same no matter what. no matter who is going to be the one to set the guys around fire. This initial scene of the three of them getting just mauled by these little rock sort of spider tick things, it has to happen. So, I might as well just draw it and think about the story part later. So that's what I spent, I think maybe 45 minutes doing this drawing. And, like, in real time it took 45 minutes, and it's been sped up, I think, by 4. So that's how much time has been going into this drawing that you're watching right now. So anyway, back to topic. How am I going to fix it? I decided that I'm going to, use their personalities and let that dictate who is going to be performing what in the story. So it's changed around now to where Kess, the prickly pipsqueak, is going to be the one who is wanting to just do what she wants to do to get the job done without much communication with the other two, and that's what kind of gets them in trouble. And it tends to work in her favor, but in a very chaotic kind of, you could have killed us, but I didn't kind of way. And that Clarice, who is naturally lazy, and here she is in the front getting, her hair eaten by a little rock spider there. Her personality, which is more passive, it makes more sense for her to be the one to try to be the peacemaker, or to try to be the one that says, you know what, let's not fight about it, let's just, move on, and, taking the easiest way out to bringing back some, just team peace, or at least not deal with it right now, because she's lazy and she doesn't want to deal with it, right? So that's where I'm finding that knowing the character's personality is really helping out in directing the story. And I was not a believer in the beginning that you had to do your characters first, but now I'm totally a believer. And I will forevermore be figuring out my characters first and then putting them in a situation, rather than what I used to do, where I used to think of a situation first and then make characters to fit into it, because obviously it did not work this time. I have written, or rewritten I should say, the first chapter, like the first 40 panels, that have flipped the positions between Clarice and Kess. But it's going to get more difficult as I go, because the last big battle scene, everything was written with Clarice's magic in mind, that she has fire and water and, air and earth and that kind of stuff. She's an elementalist. So everything that I had written in that action scene is based on her magic and what she can do. It doesn't make sense to have the fight between Kess and Socorro be totally ignored at the end, and then suddenly it becomes about Clarice doing her magic like that. I don't like that. I like stories and films and, comics and whatever. I like a story to have introduced a problem and then follow that problem until the end. Like, yeah, you can sidetrack off to side stories and whatever. But if it starts out with a certain problem, I like to see that, finished in the end. That was my big complaint with one of the Korean dramas I watched, where the initial problem was that this TV show was suffering and, everybody was going to lose their jobs unless they could save the show, right? So I'm like, oh, how are they going to do this? How are they going to save the show? And by the end of the series, it had just turned its attention more towards the romantic relationships that were developing. And so it was kind of like, oh, and they all, kept living their lives, and the show was saved. And I'm like, but how was the show saved? Okay. And I was also watching, what was I watching? I think Little Witch Academia, the new anime. And they're also ones that don't seem to follow through with what they introduced in the beginning to come back and be of some kind of use at the end, and that just drives me nuts personally. I like my stories to have some follow-through. So that little rant aside, yes, this has been my biggest setback, is trying to work on the story and characters independently, and what I'm doing about it, I am changing my story to fit my characters rather than the other way around, because I think once you have a good group dynamic, then they will help you decide who needs to do something in the story, or, how it's going to get done. So that's as far as I got on my page. I'll have more on that next week.